I think I'm definitely veering towards medieval. As I think about it, I want it to be medieval. If for no other reason that I am, and you're not distracting. I mean, I guess technically you are distracting me, but you're distracting me with ideas for my game. And hello, Maddie. How are you doing? Um, if you remember, Maddie, if you remember the discussion, the brief discussion we had when I was talking about how I don't think you could do Ravenloft in fifth ed. I was thinking about it. It's like, okay, so what kind of dark fantasy could you do in fifth ed? And I thought, okay, I could just sit here and type away at my machine, and as I'm thinking about it, or I could stream it. I am curious about something. Oh, I pulled a silly. That's better. It suddenly occurred to me that I couldn't see the chat pop up, and I'm like, why can't I see the chat pop up? Oh, because it's you know layered wrong. Pro streamer. Um, but I'm kind of hammering out ideas. I've been working with Derek and Naughty Cakes on this one. But I'm working on, just laid down some genre stuff, dark fantasy, fantasy horror, and then, worked out a few ideas. This was kind of a random inspiration that the world actually has an immune system, essentially, in the form, possibly aberrations. I don't know if I'm going to make them aberrations. But when you have one of these big, bad, legendary evil things, these actually rise up from the deep. And they're indiscriminate, and they're not necessarily perfect at what they do. But they will hunt down, or try to hunt down, what's going on. And thank you, Imagination Studio, for the follow. Also had a few ideas about the undead. This is kind of the Ravenloft standard, that undead aren't necessarily evil, they're just kind of likely to be evil. And now we're, cranking out, like, the actual physical setting, right? What kind of world are we looking at? I'm thinking about a medieval setting, and I've kind of been at a lock about whether I want an early medieval setting with a very small, noble cast, and a larger but still not large. Hello, Hungry. Glad to have you. A larger but still not large gentry around it of people not entitled but still peers, or going later medieval with a larger nobility. And then, Derek pointed out that we could actually have, something of a fall of an empire with a nobility that has collapsed. And now there's a lot of empty spaces that potentially these guys can fill. It's certainly a classic in dark fantasy that society has decayed, right? I think we will go with that for right now. Anything that's written down at this point might change because we are in a creative process. I did not actually walk into this with any major ideas other than fantasy horror, right? This is a creative process. And yes, I am very happy to receive input, but decayed from a prior height, areas without noble influence, and areas with a bloated nobility, a large gentry with only technical position or authority. I mean, probably default European fantasy, except where otherwise noted. This can change very readily. I will go ahead and note that down here. Subject to change. I am not entirely certain at this point. I'm not. I don't want this to be a world where, you know, just walking, you know, you walk out of your door and somebody like tries to stick a shiv into you for your money. On the other hand, there's a lot of desperation. So I would imagine that you'd be more likely to find you know, the vagabonds on the move who will like beg you for food or whatever, and who, if they are really, really desperate, you know, starving, might do the starving dog routine of attacking even when they're not in any physical condition to attack. You know, so, which, I mean, having said that, society in downturn, poverty et al. There will probably be some kind of a monarch. Since Derek's been bringing up Vampire the Masquerade, and I admittedly have been furthering his bringing up of Vampire the Masquerade, we could always say that instead of a kingdom having a principality, ruled, of course, ruled by a prince, which is basically a kingdom, except it's ruled by a prince with typically no higher authority. There will be areas of unchecked wilderness, which, as we've established up here, in dark fantasy, the wilderness tends to be an entirely untamed and unsafe place. But more areas of semi-controlled wilderness where lesser monsters herd. Unicorn, etc. Well, Matty Morgs, you know, people will sell themselves more readily too, turning humanity into little more than running beasts, slaves, etc. You've described a good portion of the medieval era. I mean, yes, you would be correct to say that peasants were not chattel slaves. There were legal differences between a peasant and a slave. Functionally, the peasant was still a slave. High and dangerous birth rate and infant mortality, low literacy and life expectancy, yes. It's always interesting to me how often in fantasy gaming it's kind of assumed that the PCs will be literate. I don't think I'm going to break away from that. It's just an odd thing to keep in mind, given that in medieval era the literacy rate. I mean, the literacy rate was higher than most people think. That doesn't mean it was high. See, Derek, this is why Pneumonica is better asked when it comes into the medieval lines. Derek, I would not describe you as lower tier. I would describe you as skilled in a different venue. You bring a lot to the table that I don't have. See, Hungary, most likely with all this going on, space will weaken, and demonic cults could grow stronger. It's entirely possible. Now, I have actually set the probability, this isn't carved in stone, but probability that there might not be, like, direct demons, right? Or there might not be many of them. I have I'm thinking of a possibility for, like, celestials and fiends that, celestials might not be inherently good, merely agents for higher powers, right? And fiends might not be inherently evil, merely people in the residuary of the underworld who weren't favored by any gods. I have, this is all, I do not know about this. This is me BSing at this point, and I can't spell residuary, or no, spell check, can't spell residuary. Interesting detail about ancient views, like pre-Christian views of tieflings can be a genetic disorder passed down through the royal lines like hemophilia. We were just discussing the inbreeding of the nobility. But an interesting thing about ancient views of the afterlife is that there wasn't really a sense of direct reward or punishment in in the afterlife. You might be blessed by a god, and which isn't necessarily a good thing, right? We talk about Valhalla and all of that. Valhalla wasn't actually necessarily a nice place to go, especially since you were looking forward to fighting one last war in which you were guaranteed to die horribly. Meanwhile, those people that didn't get into any of those vaunted categories just went into a sort of a collective pool of the dead in the underworld. So, it's possible that fiends are just corruption. Sloth loves chunk. It's possible that fiends are just corruptions of or distortions of the dead if they have been in the underworld for long enough, right? Perhaps they've eaten too much asphodel and lost some of what they were. In Focus, you focused on the higher echelons of the governing body. It's a checklist. You are filling them out. My approach is a bit more on the ground. I focus on NPCs and how they influence the world, and I tend to be more boots on the ground when starting to craft a campaign. Derek, you actually bring up an excellent point. There are two major ways. There's more than two ways, but there are two major ways that worlds get made for this. There's the top-down approach, and there's the bottom-up approach. And you, I take it, tend to follow the bottom-up approach, where you put you put feet on the ground, you put people in specific place, or you put people there, and then you put places around them, and then you put the world around them. You do it in layers like that. You build up the onion around the center point. The top-down, on the other hand, creates a world map, figuratively or literally, and then you start filling in the smaller details. I tend to go top down. I like to create a world. I started very broadly from genre, and then I worked my way down. There's a great deal of chunk love going on in chat, and I'm loving it. And start filling out further details. Obviously, I will jump down to the smaller scale. When somebody mentioned witch hunters, I was like, oh, there's a concept that'll work. I will go from the big concepts, right? The big world-spanning concept, or not necessarily world-spanning, but larger-spanning concepts, and work my way down. Derek, that is true in many ways. It is not universally true. The It depends on what you're going for, really, which way you want to go. And in a lot of cases, for a lot of horror, I mean, it depends on what you're going for as to which approach is the most efficient. I'm trying to build, probably at least a kingdom, right? And I want to have, and, I'm kind of going to build it as a society rather than build it as a place where a person lives. You are correct, though, that in a lot of horror milieus, it is more efficient to go with the bottom-up approach. And it's also oftentimes more efficient if you're setting it in a modern setting, because you already have the world, right? It's our world. You're just trying to work out how it works a bit differently in the horror world. I have lost my place. Ah, so what next? Oh, here's a question. Races. Um, do we want the standard D&D array of races? That could actually change a few things, right? You can, right? It makes a lot of difference. More chunk love. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Hey, you guys! Now, of course, Ravenloft had the standard fantasy setup. A lot of that had to do with the fact that Ravenloft was pulled together from a patchwork of a lot of other settings, right? And those other settings had all of the standard D&D races, so Ravenloft had to have all of the standard D&D races. Um, and there's something to be said for that, right? You can have a lot of differences, a lot of antipathies, a lot of problems. On the other hand, there's a lot to be said for thinning it out, and possibly even just going with humans. If you only have humans, right? I mean, the immediate thought is you are, cutting off options, right? People will make that statement, oh, you're cutting off options, you're doing whatever. On the other hand, you're focusing in a lot of the game, right? Relations between the races is a factor in any game, and when you've got a game that clearly is playing on oppression and intolerance and mistrust, it's both adding and taking away from it to have many races. It's both adding and taking away. Something to consider in the Discord under RP memes. Hungry, that is a possibility. Let me find that RP memes thing and see. I mean, it is a good guideline for how to make the world feel. And I'm not wanting to have like the full-on grim dark, right? Honestly, I don't think grim dark is actually that great for a horror game. Simply because if everything's going wrong and there's nothing you can do to change it, why are you? I mean, what is the horror? What is at stake? And before you say it, yes, I know the vampire, but you want to have a greater degree of investment and a greater sense of possibility than like that grim dark, possibly noble dark, possibly grim bright. I'm not certain exactly where to aim. So if we did have different races, would it be a I mean, would it be a situation where it's one kingdom with all the races, or Maddie? I would say that. I mean, I see what you're saying. That would strike me as not grimdark, simply because with the civilization as points of light, setting as a whole isn't really grimdark, right? It's neutral dark, grim neutral, something like that. This is a new alignment system on me. I don't know exactly definition of the terms, but um, and it should be pointed out that just because, even if we say that there aren't any like intelligent PCs that aren't human, this does not mean that there aren't like horrors that are not human, right? Or that are intelligent, that aren't intelligent, right? We might have. Well, I mean, if we're only using SRD stuff, we can't use the mind flayers. But if we wanted to, we could use mind flayers and say, yeah, oh yeah, they're intelligent. Oh, they're intelligent, all right. They don't think like you. They don't think on your level. They probably don't view you as intelligent. And they eat your brain. Right? The aboleths, who, if we're using aboleths, they come in and they know that they're dealing with horrible, that there's something terrible that they need to deal with, and so really what they're doing to you, it's for your own good, right? And incidentally, Derek, if you're still there, all of this back and forth and like discussion and bouncing off of ideas and like countering points and things like this is actually a valuable part of the creative process. One of the things about creating with others is that it's no longer just what sounded good in your head, right? You're getting other people's opinions and you're looking at what they think, and this, I mean, it's kind of a reality check, right? Getting a notification of something. Oh, thank you for the follow, Hungry. So, like, you're bringing up a lot of good points, and I don't want you to think that you are interfering with the process when you bring up these points, right? Let's see, do. I'm going to make an initial command decision, and I'm going to try to like aim my clicks so that they actually go where they're supposed to go. That's always helpful, right? And I'm going to say mostly or entirely human right now. Well, that's because when you go top down, a lot of the initial creation process is backdrop, right? You are setting the stage. You haven't yet, like, I haven't put props on the stage, right? And I certainly haven't put actors on the stage, and of course that's where the horror happens. I'm creating the backdrop. Of course, if the backdrop is all sunshine and unicorns, it's not going to contribute much to the feel. But I want to have the stage set at, I mean, it's still mutable, but I want to have the stage set so that when I do start putting elements in there, I can give them a context. Because without context, they don't really have, I mean, they literally don't have a place, right? because no place exists for them. And I tend to view horror as existing in the context of something else, right? Existing in the context of the world. This is my creative process, so I mean, it might not gel very well with yours, and I understand. I mean, more or less, yeah. Making the camp before I make the slasher. Um, so now we have, like, in very, very broad brushstrokes, an idea of the world that our heroes are living in. We know that there is at least a principality. It has fallen from some height, potentially a province of what was once a greater state. I mean, that's history. We can deal with that later. We know that there are some serious horrors out there. Legendary horrors that have taken voluntary steps towards harming others for no benefit other than just the power that it may provide, and have become something truly great. Horrible, but great. And that the world itself will lash out and try to evict them, even if it's probably not the greatest at it, and mostly ends up eating, bystanders. So let's talk about these horrors. There are probably lesser horrors to them, and in fact, a lot of the greater horrors are probably just upscales of lesser horrors. This is, after all, D&D. But let's discuss them a little bit. We'll just go ahead and put this on a new page. It is some kind of purposeful act to walk down. Absolutely, Imagination Studio, perfectly fine with that. So what, I mean, questions to ask. What intentional acts can create greater evil? What does that growth provide? Can it grow further? And I mean, we can fill in some obvious things. Intentional murder. I mean, murder is intentional. That's the very definition of murder, is that it is intentional. Murder. For no benefit. But then we have to ask the question, so how is it that there are... So how often does this work? Because an awful lot of people just kill people, right? I mean, not an awful lot of people. It's actually really, really uncommon. Like, even among murderers. Not much. And Derek, yeah. Bon appetit. Enjoy your laundry. Hungry. I'm just kind of going back into the big bads. Still don't have a neat name for them. I mean, it's entirely possible that there isn't a single name for them, but that is also a little bit boring, right? And now I'm just talking about just the basic elements of, how does one upgrade into this status of being, legendary evil? The big bads are legendary monsters. And what makes them? And I'm thinking, okay, it is supposed to, we've established that it is supposed to be where did I put it? Uh, a voluntary act for taken to harm others for no benefit other than to gain the power. These are basically elevated monsters, right? I mean, in D&D terms, we're talking about the legendary monsters, like the game term, legendary monster, right? These are the big bads of campaigns, right? In setting terms, these are people or creatures that are so far gone that they have taken some kind of intentional, horrible act just to be more evil, right? Just to have more evilness to them. Right. They've gone beyond the threshold of simply intentionally doing wrong. Right. Now they are intentionally that is like in terms of what kind of monster, that is variable, right? In Ravenloft, which is where again I'm pulling a lot of the inspiration from. It was a whole diversity of creatures, and in some cases it was just humans, right? A lot of the domain lords were just human. Right, there's a great one whose name has just escaped me because, of course, I had to say it on stream. Naturally, it left my mouth. But it was a paladin of Belenus, the Celtic sun god. Right, he's a great and noble person who went so far gone he didn't even realize that he had become a blackguard, an anti-paladin. And he just kept on going down that, still saying, still believing that he was on the righteous path, and he became a domain lord. He was just some dude, right? Just a human. Of course, the Dark Powers had given him some, little boosts as a Dark Lord, but in the end, you were just talking about a human. In fact, in Second Ed, there were several domain lords that were 0-level characters, right? Which was a thing back then. You actually did have 0-level humans. And they had a number of really, like, unusual capabilities. I'm not going to say that they were really powerful because they had, like, 4 hit points. And, terrible attack rolls and all of that, but they had peculiar things that empowered them by the Dark Powers. It's not a specific monster, it's a way of being, I suppose. It's taking that step intentionally to become more evil for its own sake. Right, I actually had a little catch line that I really liked. The act is its own reward. Being evil for them is its own reward. Right? They are further rewarded by being evil. Could one of them be an item? If the item is intelligent, I don't see why not. Actually, come to think of it, there was an intelligent sword that was a Dark Lord of a domain. So yes, absolutely. It could be an item. If it is an intelligent item capable of making decisions, then yes, it could step down that path. And in stepping down that path, you would actually approach something kind of similar to the domains of Ravenloft, because they might actually gain a lair, they might actually gain the regional effects that legendary monsters oftentimes have. It wouldn't be like the demarked domain that they can just seal off and it's their space. It's still a shared space, but this is what they've been given. This is the evil that they have been given. And I mean, I'd really, personally, I would greatly enjoy it if the scenario where the PCs are looking for this horrible desolate monster, only to discover that, yeah, it's just some random like peasant that went off the deep end and decided to be horrible and evil, and he's got no he doesn't really I mean, he has a few special powers, but nothing really big. Ravenloft was not. Understand, I'm not doing Ravenloft here, and what? Hi, Crunky. Well, hello, General Chaos. How are all of you doing? I done been raided. I am sorry to say that you guys have barged in on one of the on not a gaming stream, but I am doing creative stuff. I am we're actually working on some dark fantasy setting stuff for D&D. I am doing well, Night Owl. I do I do have something that I would like to say. General Chaos, now that you've raided, I would like for you to get out your very best and very favorite glass or mug. I'm not picky. I'd like for you to fill it with your highest class form of hydration, your very favorite. I'd like for you to absorb the wonderful smell, envelop yourself in the delightful flavor, and pray, take seat. Glad to have you all. We are doing. I actually had a conversation with another streamer the other day that got me thinking about dark fantasy. I do not mind lurkers, Onion. I don't. There are already people lurking. And I'm certainly aware that this is possibly not the stream that you're up for, given that you just came from Chaos's stream. I'm not. I don't have Chaos's energy. I'm very sorry. But this is the. I just started today working on this. This is based on the idea of, okay, if we can't do thank you, Chaos. Yes, hungry. Crocodiles also lurk. My stream is filled with crocodiles. Some of them are robot crocodiles. I just sat down and started setting down ideas. And I knew I wanted like a dark fantasy setting. I wanted fantasy horror. I know that Ravenloft was an inspiration because I don't think modern D&D can really properly do a Ravenloft setting. And so I thought to myself, well, how could you get D&D to do, like, what kind of fantasy horror could you do in Ravenloft? And so I've been bashing out ideas. Right now, I'm working on the idea for, like, the really bad things, right? The equivalent to the domain lords of Ravenloft, the Strahd von Zaroviches, at the Oslins, and all of those. And scrolling our way down here, we are discussing, my idea is that it is a voluntary act. By nature, it has to be a voluntary act to embrace this horror. Yes, Lord Soth, well, Lord Soth, depends on who you ask, Hungry. Oh god, why can I not remember their names now? The Hickmans kind of reclaimed Lord Soth, but Lord Soth was put in Ravenloft, and Sithicus was actually one of my favorite domains. I loved Sithicus. Cannibal Kender. It's just great stuff. Um, the the is this what the inside of your head is like at the Berserker? I hope you mean a document file and not a voluntary act taken to harm others, Draven. Uh, um, but I'm contemplating the fact that it has to be a voluntary act, right? Even if you are already like a vampire and you have to prey upon others to survive. Um, that doesn't necessarily make you automatically evil. You could still choose to try to do as much good as you can. And certainly we've gotten a lot of media that will justify that opinion. A lot of media that will justify that opinion. A lot. But, even if you're just some ordinary person, right? Ordinary random human being, you can just thinking the D&D stuff. Okay, fair enough. Even if you are just an ordinary human, you can just step, like, it doesn't even have to be a slippery slope. You can just drop off a cliff, right? At any time. Nothing's gonna stop you. And in a fantasy world where, you know, where powers like this actually have power, jumping off that cliff might make you fly to horrible, horrible places. So I'm considering the idea of how you become one, and, you know, what does it provide? I mean, I've already kind of answered a portion of that question, because there are legendary monsters in D&D. Take care, Draven. Glad to have you. So really, I'm working on this startup point. What intentional acts are we talking about? And I thought of the obvious case of murder for no profit or benefit, right? You know, you just kill somebody because you think it will make you more powerful, right? You don't get nothing good comes back on you for it or whatever. And then I kind of asked, okay, so is this a guaranteed? Because occasionally people just do this kind of stuff, right? Usually they are very, very sick people, but occasionally they do that. Do we want to say that it happens often enough? Because we are in the dark fantasy world where people might just decide to kill people. Another great way to make evil is like a fall from grace sort of thing, where heroes become villains. Epic car royale. Those are certainly fun to watch. The fall from grace idea is certainly a great thing. I mean, I mentioned that paladin of Belenus who literally just didn't notice the fact that he'd become a blackguard for all of the horrible things he was doing in the name of what should have been a good god of the sun. I suppose could be mentioned, might be a justification, well, let's put that in quotes, justification for human sacrifice in cults, except that if it's for a god, then it's for profit. Alright, well, that's a formatting, yay! Alright, there we are. It just occurred to me that, yeah, if people are killing people for profit, I mean, isn't that what cults do? Yeah, no, cults are doing it for a god. They're trying to get in good with a god by giving them human sacrifices. No, that's too altruistic for this, which probably tells you just exactly how dark this is going. A lot of the villains in Dragonlance, actually, since we mentioned Lord Soth, I'll mention Dragonlance. A lot of the villains in Dragonlance didn't necessarily have a good intention, but they recognized their intentions as being good, right? It was for the good. It was for some purpose or for some good. And then, but a number of the villains really were just looking to have some fun, or doing it, or just single-mindedly pursuing their own power and their own blessing for no real reason other than itself, right? The gathering of power was its own reward. I'm intentionally trying to make this concept of the legendary monster as someone who has done something like super bad to be rare, right? These do need to be the kinds of things that you just don't see very often. And the best way of doing that is just making sure that the things, alrighty, take care, hungry, that the things are, what makes them what they are isn't something that generally happens. How often does somebody kill someone for like almost literally no reason? Less often than you might think. On the other hand, there might be a chance of failure, right? There might be an error rate on it. Maybe your heart wasn't entirely in it. God only knows. I don't know what else might qualify for this. Desecration of permanent holy sites, perhaps? Um, Maintain. That's I'm going to really like. Yeah, I mean that one I'm not solid on that one at all. And what does the growth provide? Um, your dog was being a dog. Well, that's probably for the best. I think. Howdy, Shrubbles. How are you? If it makes you feel any better, I missed it too. I was here. Anyway, so what does go with power? What does the power provide? It probably doesn't change your species or similar, right? It may, okay, that's going to turn it bold. May make you undead, maybe. It will not turn you into a demon or werewolf or golem, but it can enhance you as one of those. Race to the petrol station to get a Steam gift card because I wanted to gift Teddy a game and he's crying now. I have no idea. Is this good crying or bad crying? I have actually blocked links on this, although I mean, several people have been trying to put in links, so I might clear that block. There have been recent issues that I just kind of cut off. Even as a human, though, it provides you with greater power. Additional abilities. Thank you. Yes, Derek. I was rated by General Chaos Live. General Chaos Live, by the way, is a very fun streamer, and I highly recommend his streams. Today I had an idea nagging at me that I'm actually now exerting myself on, so I didn't catch his stream, and he decided to catch mine. But, Derek, we have some amount of development on our friends, the Big Bads. I still haven't. Incidentally, all kinds of new blood. I have these, the idea of these elevated evils, the greater evils of the world, and I can't think of a goddamn name for them. If anybody would like to, I've already kind of taken up horrors with the horrors of the deep, so that's kind of a bit out. But if anybody has a great idea for a name, feel free to suggest it. Because I'm tired of calling them the Big Bads. We're talking elevated. They are not a specific type. It is a process of, they've embraced being evil for its own sake and gained power from it. So it is not a specific type of thing. It is kind of an evil evolution in the Pokemon sense of evolution. Like, you can just be an ordinary human, right? And drop into this. And you will probably remain a human. Not so much on the ordinary side, but you're still human. Even if you are essentially inhuman in psychology. It might not get a name, right? I mean, it's always possible that it doesn't get a specific name, but I'd prefer to give it a name simply because it helps in discussing what we're talking about, right? Like, in setting, it might not have a name, but I'd like to have something to call them. It also distant. This is the person from others, forces them to be more predatory towards people. It may prevent any lasting relationships with others. Positive relationships. The exact characteristics vary. One person might to run swiftly on all fours, climb walls, hide in shadows, etc. Forced to interestingly, Shribbles, D&D actually isn't my major system. I'm much more of a Savage Worlds person, but the current edition of D&D has kind of I mean, it's sort of drawn me in. I actually it caught my eye when I saw a third-party work for putting it into space opera. And hungry, yes. That's why I'm saying that they might not have an in-game name, but I'd like to have a name to call them, even if it's just a game term name, something to refer to them as, right? Because if if I'm referring to them in game terms, I need to refer to them as something. Never had any nerd friends who played D&D. Well, it's a shame. You just had the nerd friends who played Magic. Hunt people for food. That same person might also. In an unsettling way. I am working on a setting, right? At this point, I'm just painting the broad brushstrokes of a setting for D&D, because I'm doing like the top-down method of creation. But I'm developing a setting. I honestly have no idea if I will ever run the setting, but it does have my interest. Incidentally, this term comes from Van Richten's guide, the card game Munchkin. I do know the card game Munchkin. Don't know all of Munchkin, there's been a lot of it, but Zeitgeber actually comes from Van Richten's guide to the Created. A lot of the Created had these behavioral prompts that were like essentially Pavlovian responses to events or to things. So, in Mask of the Red Death, which was a Victorian setting D&D game, yes, that hungry. That's basically all of Munchkin right there, just summarized. And it was this, it's, as a flesh golem, stitched together from a lot of parts. This is actually stitched together from the bodies of a number of orphans that this guy was supposed to be the caretaker for, and he just really failed at caretaking for them. And he tried to like recreate them as this one weird conglomerate. And he had this one feature that I kind of borrowed from Peter Pan, that if ever he heard laughter, or it heard laughter, it would do the cockscrow, right? It hears a laugh, which was great because once the players found out about this, I could sit there at the gaming table as the DM, go, and like all of the players would their blood would run cold at the sound of it because it was a really scary enemy. And so I actually freaked out my players by by doing a rooster crow at the gaming table. I scared them and scared the pants off of them doing that. It was great. How often can you do that? Yeah, pretty much just one mega orphan. Right, it's the orphan of orphans, made by orphans for orphans of orphans. Since this happens, the horrors of the deep will begin. Working When you gauge your success as a storyteller, or when you gauge your success as an ST or GM by therapy bills and alcohol cost and post session, you're probably running cult. Two. Can get a layer for one thing. And lesser monsters. I know I've suddenly fallen silent. I'm in that silent thought mode that if you've ever had that moment of thought that literally tries to just clamp down on your throat and keep you from speaking. All right. Firstly, it is possible to become a lesser monster without intentional act. I think we want to set that down right now. Right? Being a lesser monster is not necessarily a punishment for any crime, and even as if it is, it might not be in scale to the crime.